So we have 15 minutes of questions. Yes, please. They usually don't work,
Neither.
but we use them anyway.
Okay. Does it work now?
Yes.
Okay. Number one, I absolutely agree with it, what you've been saying. But there's one problem.
If it's only one, we can...
Well, listen carefully. In a country in Europe called Switzerland, the government discovered actually this problem about 10 years ago. There was a Minister of Finance named Merz who decided to cut the debts of Switzerland by creating surplus every year, which actually happened in the last years. The last year was about, I think, about 2 billion Swiss francs. The only problem that you have is that to do that, you would need to have ministers that really remain on their post. The problem that you have in the most countries, especially in Europe, is that all these ministers are voted or elected for 4 years, if they remain, and there is no continuation. So if a minister decides with the government to really save and behave well and create surplus, the next one would cut it. So I absolutely agree with that, with what you are saying, because there's the planning of every family, of every normal thinking man. But how would you think that we can really solve the problem that the politicians, even if you give them this and they understand it, they are unable to do it? Because if they try to do it, they won't be elected again. So explain that.
Yep. Absolutely great question. That's exactly why I would confiscate it. Destroy the ring of power, because we can't handle it. So there are many ways how to do this. Either we can do something like with the National Bank. We have an independent check body that's national, and that sort of decides how much deficit or surplus in that given year should be ordained to the economy. We've had a couple of suggestions like this coming from National Economic Council, in which I had this as sort of an area of my responsibility after Edvard Janota passed away. We had a very simple autopilot, and that autopilot said, sort of instead of the 3% Maastricht criteria, which by the way is also a little bit crazy. You know, in the beginning, I think the intention was nice. By no circumstances can you run deficits more than 3% of GDP. In 2 years' time, psychologically, that changed to deficits all the way until 3% are okay. That's a huge difference. Also, there is no reason why an economy which is growing should be allowed to have any deficits. Take a look on Czech Republic or Slovakia. That country was growing almost 10%, and they had 2% of GDP deficit, and it was like, hallelujah, this is America. I mean, how much must the country grow to produce a surplus? And it doesn't, well, okay, so that's my second point. My third point is countries even started, well, exception Switzerland or even Finland, some other countries were actually quite good at it, but otherwise most of the countries started targeting 3%. It's like when you have a child and you tell him or her, okay, no worse grades than 3 may you bring from the school. And if your son or daughter is a rational optimizing agent, the only rational thing would be to bring exactly 3s. Because, well, you said I'm not allowed to bring 4s and 5s, so the optimum behavior for me is to target at 3s. And if I by mistake get grade 1 or grade 2, obviously I have misoptimized my time. I studied too much. I could have played football for 2 more hours. Because, I mean, the rule is very, very simple. That's my third point. And my fourth point is, again, psychologically, I have this feeling, correct me if I'm wrong, because there is no research on this, that we sort of put a balanced budget at -3%. So anything that's less than 3%, we were applauding as if it was a budget surplus. If you take my meaning. So what to do? Well, the suggestion that we came up with is a very simple suggestion. We call it Joseph's rule, again coming from this 7 years, 7 fat cows and seven lean cows. Here I always have to be careful, not to look on anyone in particular when I talk about the cows. And the rule of Joseph was very simple during the good years. Do not eat everything that grows, but save part of it so that you will not die of hunger in the bad years. So our rule was GDP plus deficit must be less than, let's say, 3 or 4, some constant. In other words, if your economy is growing by 7%, you must have, let's say the constant is 3 for Czech Republic. So in other words, you target 3% of GDP growth. And if that growth is 7%, you have to have 4% budget surplus. If your economy is -3, you can have 6% budget deficit. So we can still use fiscal policy in the times of need. The government can help the economy. Well, there it was emphasized. The future can help the present. It's not really the government doing it. And this is also another thing, if I may. Okay, I'll finish this and then I'll confuse myself with the other thought. So the rule was simple. Target, like you target inflation, target growth. 2-3%. If growth is stronger, cool it down, create budget surpluses, make reserves, or pay down the debt. So yeah, and how the politicians wouldn't be able to access the market. Like now, a politician cannot access the coinage factory. They don't have the keys. They can't go to a printing machine and print. Only National Bank can do that. So deficits would be rationed. So that's one option, to have an autopilot like this, or other autopilot, or the German version where you actually ban the usage of fiscal policy in a way. Another way how to do this would not to have a national body like the National Bank, but to have a European body which would sort of do this redistribution, not only in time, but also in space, and say, okay, Greece now, or not even Greece, but regions, this shouldn't be national, we should also think of fiscal policy not in national terms, but in regional terms and in industry terms. Crises no longer follow countries. They usually follow industries. Sometimes they follow a region. A region gets flooded, or I don't know, something. But that's not usually a huge problem economically, and it's usually not such a brainer either. But we shouldn't think of fiscal policy in terms of... This is also the way we, by the way, do statistics. If we wouldn't have national statistics, but if we had statistics, I don't know, blondes versus the normal people, I'm a blonde, the whole debate would look different. And these statistics are absolutely random, the way we we measure old versus young, and these things, it matters how you actually, what you measure, how you measure it, etc. So regional and industrial fiscal policy that will be pan-European is another option. That's sort of a solution that I think is going to go in the future. Stop pretending that there's such a thing as a national debt. Which, by the way, reminds me the whole situation of Greece. The Greek problem is really the problem where we don't know whether Greece is a family or a market. If your partner or friend breaks a leg, you run to help him or her. If your baker breaks a leg, you go to another one. No hard feelings, nothing personal, it's just business. I'm not interested in the baker, I'm interested in the bakeries. In Buberian sense, I'm not interested in the you, I'm interested in the it. And we don't know whether Greece is a market or a family. And we also, this is in a way a continuation of the good old theological Christian debate, law versus grace. Should we treat the Greeks according to the law because you've signed it, we've seen it, and it's a legal document, so pay it back? Or should we forgive them? And if so, how many times? 7 times? If my brother debts against me, How many times should I forgive him? 7 times or 77 times? So I'm not giving here a solution. I'm just saying, and this is also, and I think the numbers really don't matter in the debate anymore, as you've noticed. It's really a theological debate, which looks economic today, but it really is the debate which they don't need in the United States of America anymore, because they understand that the United States are United States. And they've been doing these fiscal transfers for 200 years. Nobody even winks an eye. We do it in Czech Republic all the time. Everywhere they do it. They transfer money to regions that are troubled. So I would confiscate it. That's my sort of, and of course, yes, it looks very absurd, but let's say 100 years ago, if I said, let's confiscate monetary policy from the hands of politicians, it would look very absurd as well, but we are much better off without it. And we even now, a parliament has passed it 2 weeks ago. Our government has passed a fiscal constitution in the Czech Republic, which bans politicians to run these deficits, and sort of should follow a fiscal council that should a little bit resemble the board of a national bank, which would allow or not allow the governments to run deficits. In other words, the deficits would be according to economic, not political need. Okay, please. Do we have 2 microphones? So if there's other questions, maybe in between, the other microphone could go to whoever wants to ask the next question. So we don't have time. So there's one here.
I have
just short one, yeah.
I have 2 questions. What's your rule on wealth distribution? Because we didn't hear anything about wealth distribution in the crisis. And the second question is, if we are better off not printing money, if in the United States we print money all the time and we are doing quite well. Yeah. So that's the second question.
Yes, thank you. So the first question is wealth distribution. So this is a good question, because to me this is not a crisis of capitalism. This is a crisis of growth capitalism. The problem is it doesn't grow. And in this, I'm a capitalist more than most of my libertarian friends. Why? Because when I was young, and I still believe this, that capitalism, or democratic capitalism, the system that we have, however, let's just call it that way, is the most fertile ground for growth. What I think has happened, again, a subject-object reversal somehow in the meantime, what I think we in fact believe today, we believe that growth is a conditio sine qua non of market democracy. In other words, deprive us of growth and markets will collapse. This is what you hear all the time. Deprive us of growth, democracies will collapse. And the most extreme version, very popular among my friends, dealers, deprive us of growth and we'll go into the war. The whole system will collapse. We'll go into smashing each other's skulls up against the wall like we always did in the past very well. Just notice that if Greece happened 100 years ago, the only thing we would be talking about here, ladies and gentlemen, would be how to attack them most efficiently. Should we send artillery first, or submarines, or air force? Because they're going bankrupt. Isn't that a good news? 100 years ago, if Britons heard that Ireland is going bankrupt, I mean, that would be a party time. Or I'm half Slovak, so I can make fun of myself. I mean, come on, in Slovakia, have you heard the news? Hungary's dead. I mean, 100 years ago, that would be a great news. Not anymore. We are actually wanting to help the Greeks, the Irish. We don't know how to do it. It's another question. But we really sincerely wish them well. We wish them that they would grow. We wish even to help them with our own money, most countries that are a little bit smarter than us. But you asked about a different thing, wealth distribution. So anyway, so that's why I say I believe that democracy and markets can stand without growth. That's how much I believe market democracy. We don't need growth for market democracy to sustain itself. Those of my friends who argue, no, we need growth, you are, I don't know what, leftish or something. I say, no, you're leftish. You are saying that we need to be bribed by 3% of GDP growth per capita and purchasing power parity in order to sustain the system. I believe the system much more than you do. I think it can stand without this bribe. So it's a problem of growth capitalism. Now, why did I take all that time to answer a completely different question? It will be obvious in 1.5 minutes. It's a problem of 3 people sitting around the table having only 2 beers. In other words, how do we distribute property or wealth in a given country? So in that year, we produced 2 beers, but 3 people. Now, should the youngest go without the beer? Or should the lady have the beer? Or should the one who came first have the beer? Or should the richest have both? Or should the one who produced the beer? Or should the one who's thirsty produce the beer? Have the beer. Should a guest have the beer? Or should an alcoholic have the beer? I don't know. This is a debate that this is how do we distribute wealth? The genius answer to this very complicated ethical, philosophical, social, economic, and whatever question, in the past, the answer was, suddenly a 3rd magic beer appears. And the problem is solved. Okay? Everybody has 1 beer, da-di-da-di-da. The problem of today is that that 3rd beer didn't appear. In other words, the economy didn't grow. We have a problem. So, what's this? This is that we've really been neglecting, absolutely, and not just us economists. This is also not fair. Okay, of course, we economists, and this is not a good group to say this to because we should be whipping our backs. But when I'm talking to my friends, artists or psychologists or whoever, I say, you can't just blame us for this. We're not the ones who are producing the consumer society here. As far as I know, none of us did any adverts ever. Who makes the adverts? Well, they're called creatives. Those are artists. Artists are making money on advertisement. Psychologists, lots of psychologists, lots of sociologists are making advertisement. They should also put, like they have, no toxic thing in this chewing gum. They should also, as this advertisement contains no psychological tricks. So, this is, I think, the kernel of the problem. We have been bribed by growth to duck the question. And now we have to face it. And what was the second question? Printing money. Yeah, printing money. Well, I don't really think America is growing. I'm sorry. What's the deficit and what's the growth? And whether you print money, I don't know. With money printing, it's a similar lure like with deficits. In the beginning, it looks really sweet, but then it turns very bitter inside the stomach. And what's the problem with 3% of inflation? What's the problem with 3% deficit? What's the problem with 4% deficit? What's the problem with 6% inflation? Duck, duck, duck. With inflation or with money printing, it's, how should I put it? You're not really, well, okay, it looks like a loan or a gift to the economy, but the only thing is you're actually only taking your future energy and because then later when you want to trim down 6% of inflation to, let's say, manageable 2, then you're going to experience a slowdown of the economy. Same thing or similar thing like with fiscal. So, it looks like a loan. It looks like the bank is giving you a loan, but what you're really doing when you take a loan is you're taking your future energy, money energy or consumer energy, and you're laser printing it to today. So when I'm 60, I have to pay back whatever, 1 million crowns back, but I can now buy a Ferrari. But you have to pay it back yourself. It's a little bit like with alcohol. It also looks like alcohol is giving you all that excess energy. Let's imagine it's Friday, which, soon. 2 more hours? When you drink, let's assume, we are among economists, let's assume you're drinking somewhere in a very fine bar Friday evening, and you've got all that excess energy. You're singing, and you think you can sing, and everybody else seems to agree. You're being very funny. You suddenly discover that you can dance. You talk to girls, which is normal, but the strange thing is that they talk back. They laugh at your jokes, and you would be, sort of inclined to say, oh, this alcohol is a wonderful thing. I get all started up. But alcohol is not giving you this excess energy. Only thing alcohol, just like interest rate also time travels energy in time. Alcohol time travels your Saturday morning energy and laser prints it into a Friday evening. But the sum of the energy of the weekend is constant. You may meet your wife on a Friday evening, but you'll still have a hangover on a Saturday morning. You might have invested the money very well, but you still have to pay it back. So to me, it's a trick. It's a trick that you can use, and if you use it wisely, you may play with it, but it's a very dangerous tool, and you're unleashing a very dangerous lion. So but in America, they really have no more maneuver space except to do printing money. Here in Europe, we can do still other things. We can, for example, continue an integration. In America, it's already integrated. Let's say the cook is baked in the United States. Whereas here, we still don't have it baked. We can still put a little bit more sugar, a little bit more salt, heat it up, cool it down, and get a lot of energy from further integration. So there are still things I think we can do in Europe that we don't need to use quantitative easing, in other words, money printing. So I wish you a very good time energy traveling with money and alcohol. Thank you very much for your attention.